on this episode of the End of Tourism podcast.
You could say that in circumstances, of high culture or highly functioning culture, one of the principal attributes of that culture, the fundament of its understanding, that it is only with the advent of the stranger in their midst that the best of them comes forward.
Welcome to the End of Tourism, conversations on wanderlust, exile, and radical hospitality. A quick reminder that the podcast lives on a gift economy model, which means that anyone, anywhere can listen, regardless of their economic situation. Your gift ensures it stays that way, free of advertisements and members-only paywalls. It allows me to devote a great deal of time to this project, to pay for the software and hardware that makes the podcast possible, as well as all of the production and post-production labor. In order to keep the project fed, you can subscribe by making monthly, annual, or one-time offerings at chrischristu.substack.com, where you'll also have access to my writing on these and other subjects including food culture, psychedelics, media ecology, and myth. You can also support us by leaving a review for the pod on Apple or Spotify, by sharing the episodes with your friends, and by following us on social media via the handle, The End of Tourism. On this episode, my guest is Stephen Jenkinson, cultural activist and ceremonialist advocating a handmade life and eloquence. He is an author, storyteller, musician, sculptor, and off-grid organic farmer. Stephen is the founder and principal instructor of the Orphan Wisdom School in Canada, co-founded with his wife, Nathalie Roy, in 2010. Also, Stephen is a sought-after workshop leader articulating matters of the heart, human suffering, and confusions through ceremony. He is the author of several influential books, including Money and the Soul's Desires, Die Wise, a Manifesto for Sanity and Soul, Come of Age, The Case for Elderhood in a Time of Trouble, A Generation's Worth, Spirit Work While the Crisis Reigns, and Reckoning, co-written with Kimberly Ann Johnson. His most recent book, Matrimony, Ritual, Culture, and the Heart's Work, was released in August 2025. He is also involved in the musical project Nights of Grief and Mystery with singer-songwriter Gregory Hoskins, which has toured across North America, Europe, Australia, and New Zealand. This is an interview that I've been wondering about for a long time, in part because Stephen was the first person I ever interviewed for the End of Tourism podcast in Oaxaca, Mexico, where I live. Stephen and Nathalie were visiting and were incredibly generous. Stephen in offering his voice as a way to raise up my questions to a level that deserve to be contended with. We spoke for about 2.5 hours, if I remember correctly. And there was a lot in what you spoke to towards the second half of the interview that I think were the first kind of iterations of the Matrimony book. We spoke a little bit about the stranger and trade, and it was kind of startling as someone trying to offer their first interview and suddenly hearing something that I'd never heard before from Stephen, right? And so it was quite impressive, and I'm grateful to be here now with you all and to get to wonder about this a little more deeply with you, Stephen. This is also a special occasion for the fact that for the first time in the history of the podcast, we have a live audience among us today. Strange doings. Some scholars and some stewards and caretakers of the Orphan Wisdom enterprise. So thank you all as well for coming tonight and being willing to listen, put your ears to this. And so to begin, Stephen, I'm wondering if you'd be willing to let those who will be listening to this recording later on know where we're gathered in tonight.
Well, we're in, what's the name of this township?
North Algona.
North Algona. Township on the borders and eastern gate of Algonquin Park. Strangely named place, given the fact that they were the first casualties of the park being established. And we're in a place that never should have been cleared. My farm should never have been cleared of the tall white pines that were here, but the admiralty was in need back in the day, and that's what happened there. And we're in a place that the Irish immigrants who came here after the famine called Tramore, which more or less means good-frigging luck farming. Doesn't technically mean that, but it absolutely means that. It actually means sandy shore, which about covers the joint. And it's the only thing that covers the joint, would be sand. You have to import clay. Now that's a joke in many farming places in the world. But if we wanted any clay, we'd have to bring it in and pay for the privilege. And the farm has been in my responsibility for about 25 years now, pretty close to that. And the sheep are those of them left because the coyotes have been around for the first time in their casualty-making way. They're just out here. I'm facing the field where they're milling around. And it's the very, very beginnings of the long cooling into cold, into frigid, which is our lot in this northern part of the hemisphere. Even though it's still August, but it's clear that things have changed. And then we're on the top of a little hill, which was the first place that I think that we may have convened the school here. There was a teepee, which has really worked very well considering we didn't live here. So we could put it up and put it down in the same weekend. And right on this very hill, we were in the early days. And we've replaced that teepee with another kind of wooden structure, a lot more wood in this one. This has been known as the teaching hall or the great hall or the hall or the money pit. It was known for a little while, but it actually worked out pretty well. And it was, people who've come from Scandinavia are knocked out by the kind of old style, old world visitation that the place seems to be to them. I'd never really been before I had the idea what this should look like. But I just went from a kind of ancestral memory that was knocking about, which is a little different than your preferences, you know. You have different kinds of preferences you pass through stylistically through your life, but the ones that lay claim to you are the ones that are not interested in your preferences. They're interested in your kind of inheritance and your lineage. So I'm more or less from the northern climes of Northern Europe, and so the place looks that way. And I was lucky enough to still have my carving tools from the old days. And I've carved most of the beams and most of the posts that keep the place upright with a sort of sequence of beasts and dragons and ne'er-do-wells and very, very few humans. I think 2 maybe in the whole joint, something like that. And then mostly what festoons a deeply running human life is depicted here. And there's all kinds of stories which I've never really sat down and spoken to at great length with anybody. But they're here. And I do deeply favor the idea that one day somebody will stumble into this field, and I suppose upon the remains of where we sit right now, and wonder what the hell got into somebody. They made this mountain of timber moldering away, and that for a while what must it have been, and when they finally find the footprint of, its original dimensions, and sort of do the wild math on what must have been going on in this sandy field, a million miles in away from its home. And wherever I am at that time, I'll be wondering the same thing. What went on there? Even though I was here for almost all of it. So this was the home of the Orphan Wisdom School for more than a decade. and still is the home of the Orphan Wisdom School, even if it's in abeyance or in retreat or in its doldrums. We'll see. And many things besides. We've had weddings in here, and which is wherein I discovered old order matrimony, as I've come to call it. It was having its way with me in the same way that the design of the place did. And it's also a granary for our storage of corn. Keep it up off the ground and out of the hands of the varmints, for a while. Well, that's a beginning.
Thank you, Steve.
Mm-hmm.
You were mentioning the teepee where the school began, and I remember sleeping in there the first time I came here. Never would I have thought for a million years that I'd be sitting here with you.
It's wild, isn't it?
12 years later.
Yeah.
And so next, I'd like to do my best in part over the course of the next perhaps hour or two to congratulate you on the release of your new book, Matrimony, Ritual, Culture, and the Heart's Work.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I'm grateful to say, like many others, that I've received a copy and have lent my eyes to your good words and what is really an incredible achievement. For those who haven't had a chance to lay their eyes on it just yet, I'm wondering if you could let us in on why you wrote a book about matrimony in our time and where it stands a week out from its publication.
Well, maybe the answer begins with the question, why did you write a book? Having done so before. And you would imagine that the stuff that goes into writing a book, you'd think that the author has hopes for some kind of redemptive, redeeming outcome, some kind of superlative that drops out the back end of the enterprise. And, this is the 7th I've written. Mm-hmm. And I would have to say, that's not really how it goes. And you don't really know what becomes of what you've written, even with the kind people who do respond. And the odd non-monetary prize that comes your way, which Daiwai's gained that. But I suppose I wrote at all partly to see what was there. I had done these weddings, and I was a little bit loath to let the weddings turn entirely into something historical, something that was past. Even though I probably sensed pretty clearly that I was at the end of my willingness to subject myself to the slings and arrows that came along with the enterprise. But it's a sweet sorrow, or there's a wonder that goes along with the tangle of it all. And so I wrote to find out what happened. Strange as that might sound to you. You say, well, you were there, you kind of knew what happened, but it's not clear that yes, I was witness to the thing. But there's the act of writing a book. It gives you the opportunity to sort of wonder in 3 dimensions. And, well, the other thing I should say is I was naive and figured that the outfit who had published the more or less prior 2 books to this one would kind of inevitably be drawn to the fact that same guy, basically same voice, new articulation. And I was dumbfounded to find out that they weren't. And so I kind of, it's sort of smarted, And I think what I did was I just set the whole enterprise aside, partly to contend with the depths of the disappointment in that regard, and also not wanting to get into the terrible fray of having to parse or paraphrase the book in some kind of elevator pitch style to see if anybody else wanted to look at it. And, this is such as my touchy sense of nobility sometimes, that I just rather not be involved in the snarl of the marketplace any longer. So I withdrew, and I just set it aside. But it wasn't that content to be set aside. And, to the book's credit, it bothered me every once in a while. It wasn't a book at the point where I was actually trying to engineer it, and give it some kind of structure. I had piles of paper on the floor representing the allegation of chapters, trying to figure out what the relationship was between any of these things, what conceivably should come before what the names of any of these things might be. Did they have an identity? Was I just imposing it? And all of that stuff I was going through at the same time as I was contending with a kind of reversal in fortune personally. And so in part, it was a bit of a life raft to give me something to work on that I wouldn't have to research or dig around in the backyard for it. And give me some sort of self-administered occupation for a while. Finally, I think there's a parallel with the Die Wise book. When it came to Die Wise, I came up with what I came up with largely because in their absolute darkest, most unpromising hours, an awful lot of dying people, all of whom are dead now, it let me in on some sort of breach in the house of their lives. And I did feel that I had some obligation to them long term. And that part of that obligation turned into writing Die Wise and touring and talking about that stuff for years and years. And making a real fuss. As if I'd met them all. As if what happened is really true. Not just factually accurate, but deeply, abidingly, mandatorily true. So, although it maybe the situation doesn't sound as extreme, but the truth is when a number of younger than me people came to me and asked me to do their weddings, I, over the kind of medium term thereafter, felt a not dissimilar obligation that the events that ensued from all of that not be entrusted entirely to those relatively few people who attended. You know, you can call them an audience, although I hope I changed that, or you could call them witnesses, which I hope I made them that, and see to it that there could be not the authorized or official version of what happened, but the view from here, so to speak, which is, as I sit where I am in the hall right now, I can look at the spot where I conducted much of this when I wasn't sashaying up and down the middle aisle where the trestle tables now are. And I wanted to give a kind of concerted voice to that enterprise. And I say concerted voice to give you a feel for the fact that I don't think this is really an artifact. It's not a record. It's an exhortation that employs the things that happened to suggest that even though it is the way it is ritually, impoverished as it is in our time and place, it has been otherwise within recoverable time and history. It has. And if that's true, and it is, then it seems to me at least as true that it could be otherwise again. And so I made a fuss and I made a case based on that conviction. There's probably other reasons I can't think of right now. Being not 25 anymore and not having that many more books in me. The kind of wear and tear on your psyche of imposing order on the ramble, which is your recollection. It has only so many visitations available in it, right? You can only do that so many times, I think. And I'm not a born sort of writing person. You know, I come to it maniacally when I do. And then when it's done, I don't linger over it so much. So then when it's time to talk about it, I actually have to have a look. Because the act of writing it is not the act of reading it. The act of writing it is a huge delivery and deliverance at the same time. It's a huge gestation. And you can't do that to yourself, over and over again. But you can take some chances and look the thing in the eye. So, and I think some people who are there, they're kind of well-intended amongst them, will recognize themselves in the details of the book, beyond this is what happened and so on. they'll recognize themselves in the advocacy that's there, and the exhortations that are there, and the case making that I made, and probably the praying, because there's a good degree of prayerfulness in there too. That's why.
Thank you. God bless this new one in the world. And what's the sense for you?
Oh, yes.
Like being a 1 week old
Right.
newborn? How's that
Well,
landing in your days?
It's still damp, It's still squeaky and damp, and it's walking around like a newborn primate, kind of swaying in the breeze and listing to port or to starboard according to whatever's going on. I don't know that it's so very self-conscious in the best sense of that term yet. Even though I recorded the audio version, I don't think my voice has found every nook and cranny at this point yet. So it's kind of new. It's not news, but it is new to me, And it's very early in terms of anybody responding to it. I mean, nobody around me has really taken me aside and say, look now, I want to tell you about this book you wrote. Hasn't happened, and we'll see if it does. But I've done a few events on the other side of the ocean and here so far, maybe a handful of interviews. And those are wonderful opportunities to hear something of what you came up with mismanaged by others, misapprehended, you could say, by others. No problem. I mean, it's absolutely no problem. I mean, if you don't want that to happen, don't talk. Don't write anything down. So I don't mind a bit, And the chances are very good that it'll turn into things I didn't have in mind as people take it up and regard their own weddings and marriages and plans and schemes and fears and, family mishigas and all the rest of it through this particular lens, They may pick up a pen or a computer. It's an odd expression, pick up a computer and be in touch with me and let me know, we tried it, or whatever they're going to do, because, maybe Daiwise provided a bit of an inkling of how one might be able to proceed otherwise in their dying time or in their families or their loved ones' dying time. This is the book that's most readily lends itself to people translating into something they could actually do without a huge kind of psychic revolution or revolt stirring in them, at least not initially. This is as close as I come, probably, to writing a sequence of things that could be considered add-ons to what people are already thinking about. That I don't force everybody else out of the house in order to make room for the ideas that are in the book. That may happen, anyway, but it wasn't really the intent. The intent was to say, we are in those days when we're insanely preoccupied with the notion of a special event. We are on the receiving end of a considerable number of shards showing up without any notion really about what these shards remember or are memories of. And that's the principal contention, I think, that runs down the spine of the book, is that when we undertake matrimony, however indelicately, however by rote, however mindlessly we may do it, inadvertently we call upon those shards nonetheless. And they're pretty unspectacular if you don't think about them very deeply, like the rice or confetti, like the aisle, like the procession up the aisle, like the giving away of someone, like the seating arrangement, like the spectacle seating arrangement rather than the ritual seating arrangement. And there's a fistful of them, and they're around. And scholars aside, maybe nobody knows why they do them. Everybody just knows, quote, this is what a wedding is, but nobody knows why. And because nobody knows why, nobody really seems to know what a wedding is for. Although they do proceed like they would know a wedding if they saw one. So I make this a question to be really wondered about, and the shards are a way in. They're the kind of breadcrumb trail through the forest. They're the little bits of broken something, which if you begin to handle just 3 or 4 of them and kind of fit them together and find something of the original shape and inflection of the original vessel, kind of enunciates, begins to murmur, I guess I would say better, in your hands. And from it you can begin to infer some 3-dimensionality to the original shape. And from the sense of the shape you get a sense of contour, and from the sense of contour you get a sense of scale or size, and from that you get a sense of purpose or function or design. And from that you get a sense of some kind of serious magisterial insight into some of the fundament of human being that was manifest in the old order matrimony, as I came to call it. So who wouldn't want to read that book?
Thank you. Thank you, Stephen. Yeah, it reminds me, just before coming up here, maybe 2 weeks ago, I was attending a wedding, and there was a host or MC. And initially, just given what I was hearing over the microphone, it was hard to tell if he was hired or family or friends, right? And it turned out he was in fact a friend of the groom. And throughout the night, he proceeded to take up that role as a kind of comedian. Mm-hmm. This was the idea, I guess, and hopefully just is, because... And he was buzzing and mumbling and swearing into the microphone, and then finally minimizing the only remnant of traditional culture that showed up in the wedding. And, it was just, his thing was, okay, so when can we get to the part where it's boom, 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 and shot, 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 or whatever. There was so much that came up in my memories, in part because I worked about a decade in Toronto in the wedding industry, hospitality industry. Maybe a contradiction in terms there. And there was one moment that really kind of summed it up. I kept coming back to this reading the book, because it was everything that you wrote seemed not only antithetical to this moment, but also an antidote. Anyways, it was in North Toronto, and the owner of the venue was a kind of movie theater turned event venue, and there was a couple who was eventually going to get married there. They came in to do their tasting menu, to see what they wanted to put on the menu for the dinner for their wedding. And the owner was kind of this mafioso type, and he comes in and he sees them and he walks over, and he says, "So, you're going to get married at my wedding factory?" In all sincerity, right? Without skipping a beat. Could you imagine?
Yeah, I could. I sure could.
Yeah.
I mean, don't forget, if these people weren't doing what the people wanted, they'd be out of business. No, that's the thing. This is aiding and abetting. This is sleeping with the enemy, stylistically speaking. The fact that people, quote, settle, that's the term I would use for it, settle for this. The idea being that this somehow constitutes the most honest and authentic through line available to us is just jaw-dropping when you consider what allegedly this thing is supposed to be for. I mean, maybe we'll get into this, but I'll just leave this as a question for now. What is that moment allegedly doing? Not what are the people in it allegedly doing, the moment itself. What is it? How is it different from us sitting here now talking about it? And how is it different from the gory friggin' jet-fueled aftermath of excess? And how's it different from the cursing alleged master of ceremonies? How can you tell none of those things belong to this thing? And why do you have such a hard time imagining what does?
Well, that leads me to my next question.
You're welcome.
So I pulled a number of quotes from the book to read from over the course of the interview. And this one, for anyone who's listening, is on page 150. And you write, Stephen, spiritually speaking, most of the weddings in our corner of the world are endogamous affairs, inward looking. What is, to me, most unnerving is that they can be spiritually incestuous. The withering of psychic difference between people is the program of globalization. It is in the architecture of most things partaking of the internet, and it is in the homogeneity of our matrimony. It is this very incestuousness that matrimony was once crafted and entered into to avoid and subvert. Now, it grinds upon our differences until they are details. And so this paragraph reminded me of a time in my youth when I seemed to be meeting couples who very eerily looked like each other. No blood or extended kin relation whatsoever, and yet they had very similar faces. And so as I get older, this kind of face fidelity aside, I continue to notice that people looking for companionship tend to base their search on similitude, on shared interests, customs, experiences, shared anything and everything. This specifically in opposition to those on the other side of the aisle or spectrum to difference or divergence. And so opposites don't attract anymore. I'm curious what you think this psychic withering does to an achieved understanding of matrimony.
Well, I mean, let's wonder what it does to us generally first, before we get to matrimony, let's say. It demonizes. Maybe that's too strong. But it certainly reconstitutes difference as some kind of affliction, some kind of not quite good enough, some kind of something that has to be overcome or overwhelmed. On the road to what? On the road to sameness? So if that's the goal, then are all of the differences between us aberrations of some kind? If that's the goal. If that's the goal, are all the differences between us not God-given, but humanly misconstrued or worse? Humanly wrought? Do the differences between us conceivably then belong at all? Or is the principal object of the entire endeavor to marry yourself? Trying to put up with the vague differences that the other person represents to you. I mean, I not very jokingly said years ago that I coined a phrase that went something like the compromise of infinity, which is other people. What does that mean? The compromise of infinity, which is other people. Not to mention it's a pretty nice t-shirt, that would be. But what I meant by the phrase is this. When you demonize difference in this fashion, or when you go the other direction and lionize sameness, then one of the things that happens is compromise becomes demonized too. Compromise by definition is something you never should have done. Right? Compromise is how much you surrender of yourself in order to get by. That's what all these things become. And before you know it, you're just beaten about the head and shoulders about codependence and, not being, quote, true to yourself, as if being true to yourself is some kind of magic. I mean, the notion that yourself is the best part of you is just hilarious. When you think about it, Like, who's running amok if you if yourself is what you're supposed to be? I ask you. Like, who's doing the harm? Who's going mental? If if the self is such a good idea. So, of course, I'm maintaining here that I'm not persuaded that there is such a thing. I think it's a momentary lapse in judgment to have a self. You know, and to stick to it. That's the point I'm really making. To kind of reify it until it turns ossified and dusty and bizarrely adamant, like that estranged relative that lives in the basement of your house. Bizarrely, foreignly adamant, right? Like the house guest who just won't fuck off, kind of thing. Okay. So, to thine own self be true, is it? Well, try being true to somebody else's self for 10 minutes. Try that. That's good exercise for matrimony. Being true to somebody else's self. You'll discover that their selves are not made in heaven. Either. I underscore it. Either. I've completely lost track of the question you asked me.
What are the consequences of the sameness on this anti-cultural sameness?
Right.
And the program of it for an achieved understanding of matrimony?
Thank you. Well, I will fess up right now. I do so in the book. That's a terrible phrase. I swear I'd never say such a thing. In my book, I say the following. But in this case, it's true. I did say this. I realized during the writing of it that I had made a tremendous tactical error in the convening of the event as I did it over the years. And this is what it came to. I was very persuaded at the time of the story that appears in the chapter called Salt and Indigo in the book. I was very, very persuaded. I mean, listen, I made up the story for what it's worth, okay? But I didn't make it up out of nothing. I made it up out of a kind of tribal memory that wouldn't quite let go. And in it, I was basically saying, here's these two tribes, known principally for what they trade in and what they love most emphatically. They turn out to be the same thing. And I describe a circumstance in which they exchange things in a trade scenario, not a commerce scenario. And I'm using the chapter basically to make the case that matrimony's architecture derives in large measure from the sacraments of trade as manifest in that story. Okay? And this is going to sound obvious, but the fundament requirement of the whole conceit that I came up with is that there are two tribes. Well, I thought to myself, of course there's always two tribes at the time, and the two tribe-ness is reflected in when you come to the wedding site. You're typically asked, I hope you're still asked, family or friend of the groom or friend of the bride. And you're seated, quote unquote, accordingly, right? That's the nominal vestigial shard of this old tribal affiliation that people came from over the rise, basically unknown to each other, to arrive at the kind of no man's land of matrimony. And anyway, we proceeded accordingly. So I put these things into motion in this very room. And I sat people accordingly facing each other, not facing the alleged front of the room. And of course, man, nobody knew where to look. Because you raised your eyes and shit, there's just humans across from you. Just scads of them, right? Who you don't freaking know. And there's something about doing that to North Americans, it just throws them. So they're just looking at each other and then looking away and looking away and wondering what they're doing here and what it's for. And I'm going back and forth for 3 hours orienting them as to what is coming. Okay, so what's the miscalculation that I make? The miscalculation I made was assuming that by virtue of the seating arrangement, by virtue of me reminding them of the salt and indigo times, by virtue of the fact that they had a kind of allegiance of some sort or another to the people who are, for the moment, betrothed, that those distinctions and those affiliations together would congeal them and constitute a kind of tribal affiliation that they would intuitively be drawn towards, as you would be drawn to heat on a cold winter's night. Only to discover, as I put the thing into motion, that I was completely wrong about everything I just told you about it. What was the nature of my error was this. Virtually all of those people on one side of the room were fundamentally of the same tribe as the people on the other side of the room. Apropos of your question, you see. They were card-carrying members of the gray dominant culture of North America.
Wow.
The bleached, kind of amorphous, kind of rootless, ancestor-free, even regardless of whether their people came over in the last generation from the alleged old country, it doesn't really claim them. There were two tribes, but I was wrong about who they were. That was one tribe. Virtually everybody sitting in the room was one tribe. So who's the other tribe? Answer is me and the 4 or 5 people who were in on the structural delivery of this endeavor with me. We were the other tribe. We didn't stand a chance. You see? And I didn't pick up on that. And I didn't cast it accordingly and employ that instead. I employed the conceit that I insisted was manifest and mobilized in the thing, instead of the manifest dilemma, which is that everybody who came knew what a wedding was. And me and 4 or 5 other people were yet to know if this could be one. That was the tribal difference, if you will. So it was kind of invisible, wasn't it? Even to me at the time. Or I say maybe especially to me at the time. And so things often went the way they went, which was for however much fascination and willingness to consider there might have been in the room, there was quite a bit more either flat affect and kind of lack of real fascination or curiosity, or sometimes downright hostility and pushback. Yeah. So all of that comes from the fact that I didn't credit as thoroughly as I should have done the persistence in Anglo-North America of a kind of generic sameness that turned out to be what most people came here ancestrally to become. Starting again is recipe for cultural loss of a catastrophic order, the fantasy of starting again, right? And we talked about that in your podcast, and you and I have talked about it privately apropos of your own family, and everybody who's sitting in this room knows what I'm talking about. And when does this show up? Does it show up, when you're walking down the street? Does it show up when you're on the mountaintop? Does it show up in your peak experiences? And the answer is maybe. It probably shows up most emphatically in those times when you have a feeling that something special is supposed to be so. And all you can get from the supposed to is the allegation of specialness. And then you look around in the context of matrimony and you see a kind of febrile, kind of strained, the famous bridezilla stuff, all of that stuff. You saw it in the hospitality industry, no doubt. You know, the kind of mania for perfection, as if perfection constitutes culture. Right? With every detail checked off in the checkbox, that's culture. You know, as if everything goes off without a hitch and there's no guffaws. And in fact, anybody could reasonably make the case, where do you think culture appears? When the script finally goes sideways. That's when. And when you find out what you're capable of ceremonially. And generally speaking, I think most people discovered that their ceremonial illiteracy bordered on the bottomless. That's when you find out.
Wow.
Yeah, that's why people, in speech time, they reach in there, get that piece of paper, and just look at it. Don't even look up. Terrified that they're going to go off script for a minute. As if the gods of matrimony are a scripted proposition.
Thank you for sharing that with us. Yeah. Degree of deep reflection and humility that I'm sure comes with it.
Mea culpa, baby. Yeah, I got that one totally wrong. And I didn't know it at the time. I mean, wow. Like, how much can you transgress and have the consequences of doing so, like, spill out across the floor like a broken thermometer's mercury and not wise up? But of course, I was as driven as anybody. I was as driven to see if I could come through with what I promised to do the year before. And keeping your promise can make you into a maniac.
Well, I imagine that, you wouldn't have been able to see that even years later if you didn't say yes in the first place.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I wouldn't have been able to make the errors. Right? Yeah. I mean, as errors go, this is not a mortal sin. Right? And you could chalk it up to it's a legitimate miscalculation. Well, so? All I'm saying is, it turns out I was there too. And it turns out I wasn't, even though I was allegedly this circus master of the enterprise, but I wasn't free and clear of the things we were all contending with. The kind of mortality and sort of cultural ricketiness that we're all heirs to. That's how I translated it, as it turns out. So, P.S. There was a moment, which I don't remember which setting it was now, but there was a moment when maybe we'll see if she becomes a bride, mother slid up to me during the course of the proceedings, and in a kind of stage whisper, more or less hissed at me as follows: "Is this a real wedding?" I mean, that's not a question. Not in that setting. Obviously not. That is an accusation. Right? And a withering one at that. And there was a tremendous amount of throwdown involved. So, was it? I mean, what we do know is that she did not go to any of the weddings that she was thinking of at the time and go to the front of the room where the celebrant is austerely standing there with the book or the script or the well-intentioned or the self-penned vows and never hissed at him or her, "Is this a real wedding?" Never once did she do that. We know that. Right? And I think we know why. But she was fairly persuaded she knew what a real wedding was. And all she was really persuaded by was the poverty of the weddings that she'd attended before that one. Well, I was as informed in that respect as she was, wasn't I? I just probably hadn't gone to as many reprobate weddings as she had. So she had more to deal with than I did, even though I was in the position of the line of fire. And I didn't respond too well to the question. I have to say, at the moment, I was rather combative. But I mean, you try to do what I tried to do and not have a degree of fierceness to go along with your discernment. Just to see if you can drag this carcass across the threshold. Anyway, that happened too.
Yeah. Dominant culture in North America.
Heard of it?
Yeah. Well, in Matrimony, there's quite a bit in which you write about hospitality and radical hospitality. And I wanted to move in that direction a little bit because in terms of these kind of marketplace rituals or ceremonies that you were mentioning, it's something that we might wonder, I think as you have, how did it come to be this way? And so I'd like to, if I can, once again quote from Matrimony, in which you speak to the etymology of hospitality. And so for those interested, on page 88, the word hospitality comes from hospitailler, meaning, quote, one who cares for the afflicted, the infirm, the needy. There's that thread of our misgivings about being on the receiving end of hospitality. Pull on it. For the written history of the word, at least, it has meant, quote, being on the receiving end of a kind of care you'd rather not need. End quote.
That's so great. I mean, before you go on with the quote, it's so great to know that the word unexamined just kind of leaks upside, doesn't it? Hospitality. I mean, nobody goes hospitality, ooh. And then if you just quietly do the obvious math to yourself, there's so much awkwardness around hospitality. This awkwardness must have an origin, have a home. There must be some misgiving that goes along with the giving of hospitality. Mustn't there be? How else to understand where that kind of ickiness is to be found, right? And it turns out that the etymology is giving you the beginnings of a way of figuring it out, what it is, that you're on the receiving end of a kind of succor that you wish you didn't need, which is why it's the word for hospital.
Wow. May I repeat
that
sentence once more? For the written history of the word, at least, it has meant, quote, being on the receiving end of a kind of care you'd rather not need, end quote. Mm-hmm. And so this last part hits home for me, as I imagine it does for many. And it feels like the orthodoxy of hospitality in our time is one based not only in transaction, but in debt. That if you offer hospitality to me, then I owe you hospitality.
Right.
I'm indebted to you, and we are taught in our time that the worst thing to be is in debt.
Right.
And so people refuse both the desire to give as well as the learning skill of receiving. And this is continuing on page 88 now. Quote, but there's mystery afoot with this word. In its old Latin form, hospice meant both host and guest.
Amazing.
Either
one. This is absolutely amazing. We're fairly sure that there's acres of difference between the giver of hospitality and the receiver, that the repertoire is entirely different, that the skew between them is almost insurmountable, that they're not interchangeable in any way. But the history of the word immediately says, really, the history of the word without question says that host and guest are virtually the same, sitting in different places, being different people, more or less joined at the hip. I'll say more, but you go ahead with what you were going to do.
In its Proto-Indo-European origins, hospitality and hospice is a compound word, gosh pot, or hosh pot. And it meant something like stranger / guest / host and powerful lord. It is amazing to me that ancestrally the old word for guest, host, and stranger were all the same word. Potent ceremonial business this is. In those days, the server and the served were partners in something mysterious. This could be confusing, but only if you think of guest, host, and stranger as fixed identities. If you think of them as functions, as verbs, the confusion softens and begins to clear. The word hospice in its ancient root is telling us that each of the people gathered together in hospitality is bound to the others by formal etiquette, yes, but the bond is transacted through a subtle scheme of graces. Hospitality, it tells us, is a web of longing and belonging that binds people for a time, some hitherto unknown to each other. It is a clutch of mutually binding elegances, you could say. In its ancient practice, hospitality was a covenant. According to that accord, however we were with each other, that was how the gods would be with us. We learn our hospitality by being on the receiving end of godly ministration. That's what giving thanks remembers. We proceed with our kin in imitation of that example and in gratitude for it. And so today, among, quote, secular people, with the gods ignored, this old-time hospitality seems endangered, if not fugitive. I'm curious how you imagine that this rupture arose. The ones that separated and commercialized the radical relationships between host and guest, that turned them from verbs to nouns, and something like strangers to marketplace functions.
Well, of course, this is a huge question you've asked. And I'll see if I can unhuge it a bit. Let's go right to the heart of what happened. Just no preliminaries, just right to it. So to underscore again, the beauty of the etymology, and I've told you over and over again, the words will not fail you. And this is just a shining example, isn't it? That the fraternization is a matter of ceremonial alacrity, that the affiliation between host and guest, which makes them partners in something, that something is the evocation of a third thing that's neither one of them. It's the thing they've lent themselves to by virtue of submitting to being either a host or a guest. One. Two, you could say that in circumstances of high culture or highly functioning culture, one of the principal attributes of that culture is the fundament of its understanding that it is only with the advent of the stranger in their midst that the best of them comes forward. Okay? Follow that? So this is a little counterintuitive for those of us who don't come from such places. We imagine that the advent of strangers in the midst of the people I'm describing would be an occasion where people hide their best stuff away until the stranger disappears. And upon the disappearance of the stranger, the good stuff comes out again. You know? So I'm just remembering just now, there's a moment in the New Testament where Jesus says something about the best wine. And he's coming from exactly this page that we're talking about, not the page in the book, but this understanding. He said, serve your best wine first, unlike the standard that prevails, right? So, again, what a stranger does in real culture is call upon the cultural treasure of the host's culture and provides the opportunity for that to come forward, right? By what you can understand, let's say, for simplicity's sake, there's two kinds of hospitality. There's probably all kinds of gradations, but for the purposes of responding to what you've asked, there's two. One of them is based on kinship, okay? So, family meal. So, everybody knows whose place is who's around the table. Or, it doesn't matter, you sit wherever you want. Or, when we're together, we speak shorthand. That's the shorthand of familiarity and affinity, right? Everybody knows what everybody's talking about. A lot of things get half said or less, isn't it? And there's a certain fineness, isn't it, that comes with that kind of course there is, and I'm not diminishing it at all. I'm just characterizing it as being of a certain frequency or caliber or charge. And the charge is, it trades on familiarity. It requires that. There's that kind of hospitality. Oh, sit wherever you want. Oh, we don't, remember this one? We don't stand on ceremony here. Oh, you're one of the family now. I just got here. What? But of course, you can hear in the protestations the understanding in that circumstance that formality is an enemy to feeling good in this moment, isn't it? It feels stiff and starched and uncalled for, or worse. It feels imported from elsewhere. It doesn't feel friendly. So I'm giving you now beginnings of a differentiation between how cultures who are really functioning as cultures understand what it means to be hospitable, and what often prevails today, trading as a kind of low-grade warfare conducted against the strangeness of the stranger. The whole purpose of treating somebody like their family is to mitigate and finally neutralize their strangeness, so that for the purposes of the few hours in front of us all, there are no strangers here. Right? Okay. Then there's another kind. And intuitively, you can feel it, what I'm saying. You've been there, you know exactly what I mean. There's another kind of circumstance where the etiquette that prevails is almost more emphatic, more tangible to you than the familiar one. That's the one where your mother or your weird aunt or whoever she might be brings out certain kind of stuff that doesn't come out every day. And maybe you sit in a room that you don't often sit in. And maybe what gets cooked is stuff you haven't seen in a long time. And some part of you might be thinking, what the hell's all this about? And the answer is, it's about that guy in the corner that you don't know. And your own ancestral culture told acres of stories whose central purpose was to convey to outsiders their understanding of what hospitality was. That is fundamentally what the Iliad and the Odyssey are often returning to and returning to and returning to. They even had a word for the ending of the formal hospitality that arose around the care and treatment of strangers. It was called pomp or pompe, from which we get the word pompous. And you think about what the word pompous means today. It means nose in the air, doesn't it? It means thinks really highly of oneself, isn't it? And it means useless, encumbering, kind of artificial, kind of going through the motions stuff, with a kind of aggrandizement for fun. That's what pompous means. Well, the people who gave us the word didn't mean that at all. This word was the word they used to describe the particular moment of hospitality when it was time for the stranger to leave. And when it was mutually acknowledged that the time for hospitality has come to an end. And the final act of hospitality is to accompany the stranger out of the house, out of the compound, out into the street, and provision them accordingly and wish them well. And as is oftentimes practiced around here, standing in the street and waving them long after they disappear from view. This is pompous. This is what it actually means. Pretty friggin' cool when you get corrected once in a while. Isn't it? Yeah. So, as I said, to be simplistic about it, there's at least a couple of kinds. And one of them treasures the advent of the stranger, understanding it to be the detonation point for the most elegant part of us to come forward. Now, those of us who don't come from such a place, we're just bamboozled and shanghaied by the notion of formality, which we kind of eschew, no? You don't like formality when it comes to celebration, as if these two things are hostile one to the other. But I'd like you to consider the real possibility that formality is grace under pressure, and that formality is there to give you a repertoire of response that rescues you from the gross limitations of your autobiography. Next question. I mean, that's a beginning.
Absolutely. Thank you. Once again, Stephen. So alongside the term or concept of pomp or Pompeii, in which the guest or stranger was led out of the house or to the entrance of the village, there is also the consideration around the enforcement of hospitality, which you write about in the book. And you write, the enforcement of hospitality runs the palpable risk of violating or undoing the cultural value it is there to advocate for. Forcing people to share their good fortune with the less fortunate stretches to the point of undoing the generosity of spirit that the culture holds dear. Enforcement of hospitality is a sign of the eclipse of hospitality, typically spawned by insecurity, contracted self-definition, and the darkening of the stranger at the door. Instead, such places and times are more likely to encourage the practice of hospitality in subtle, generous ways, often by generously treating the ungenerous. And so there seems to be a need for limits placed on hospitality in terms of the pomp or Pompeii, the maximum 3 days in which a stranger can be given hospitality, and concurrently a need to resist enforcing hospitality. This seems like a kind of high wire act that hospitable cultures have to balance in order to recognize and realize an honorable way of being with the stranger. And so I'm wondering if you could speak to the possibility of how these limits might be practiced without being enforced. What might that look like in a culture that engages with such limits, but without prohibitions?
That's a very good question. Well, I think your previous question was what happened, I think, in a nutshell, and I didn't really answer that. So maybe see how I can use this question to answer the one that you asked before. What happened? So there's no doubt in my mind that something happened. That it's kind of demonstrable, if only with the benefit of hindsight, right? Or we can feel our way around the edges of the absence of the goneness of that thing that gives us some feel for the original shape of that thing. So you could say I'm trafficking in ideals, quote unquote, here. And after a fashion, maybe, yeah. But the notion of ideals, when it's used this slanderous way, suggests that, quote, it was never like that. And I suggest to you, it's been like that in a lot of places, and there's a lot of places where it's still like that. Although globalization may be the coup de grace performed upon this capacity. Okay? But anyway, okay, so what happened? Well, you see, in the circumstance that I described apropos of the stranger is in on it. The stranger's principal responsibility is to be the vector for this sort of grandiose generosity coming forward, and to experience that in a burdensome and unreciprocated fashion. Until you realize that their willingness to do that is their reciprocity. Everybody doesn't get to do everything at once. You can't give and receive at the same time. You know what that's called? Secret Santa at school. Isn't it? That's where nobody owes nobody nothing at the end. That's what we're all after. I mean, one of your questions, pointed to that. That there's a kind of, teeter-totter balance between what people did for each other and what they received for each other. Right? And nobody feels slighted in any way, perfect balance, etc. Well, the circumstance here has nothing of the kind going with it. The circumstance we're describing now is one in which the hospitality is clearly unequal in terms of who's eating whose food, for example. In terms of the absolutely frustrated notion of reciprocity. That in fact, you undo your end of the hospitality by trying to pay back, or give back, or pay at all, or break even, or not feel the burden of God, you've been on the take for freaking hours here now. And if you really look in the face of the host, I mean, they're just getting started. And you can't take it anymore. So one of the ways that we contend with this is through habits of speech. So if somebody comes around with seconds. They say, would you like a little more? And you say,
I'm good.
I'm good. You see? I'm good is code for what? Fuck off. That's what it's code for. It's a little strong. It's a little strong. What I mean is, when I'm good comes to town, it means I don't need you and what you have. Good God, you're not there because you need it, you knucklehead. You're there because they need it. Because their culture needs an opportunity to remember itself. Right? Okay. So what happened? Because you're making it sound like a pretty good thing, really. Like who would say, I think we've had enough of this hospitality thing, don't you? Let's try, keeping our shit to ourselves. That sounds like a good alternative. Let's give it a week or two, see how it rolls. Never happened. Nobody decided to do this change, I don't think. I think the change happened, and sometime long after people realized that the change had taken place. And it's very simple. The change, I think, went something like this. As long as the guest is in on it, there's a shared and mutually held understanding that doesn't make them the same. It makes them, to use the quote from the book, partners. Okay? With different tasks to bring this thing to light, to make it so. What does that require? A mutually held understanding in vivo, as it's happening, what it is. Okay? So that the stranger, who's not part of the host culture, sorry, let me say this differently. The culture of the stranger has made the culture of the host available to the stranger, no matter how personally adept he or she may be at receiving. Did you follow that?
A little.
Okay, say it again.
Yes, please.
Okay. The acculturation, the cultured sophistication of the stranger is at work in his or her strangerhood. Okay? He or she's not at home, but their cultural training helps them understand what their obligations are in terms of this arrangement we've been describing here. Okay? So I think the rupture takes place when the culturation of one side or the other fails to make the other discernible to the one. One more time. When something happens whereby the acculturation of one of the partners makes the identity, the presence, and the valence of the other one untranslatable. Untranslatable. I could give you an example from what I call the etiquette of trade. Or the, what was the word? Not etiquette, what's the other word? The...
Covenant?
Okay, covenant of trade, we'll call it. So imagine that people are sitting across from each other, two partners in a trade. Okay? Imagine that they have one thing to sell or move or exchange, and somebody has something else. How does this work? Not what are the mechanics? That can be another discussion, but if this works, how does it work? Not how does it happen? How does it actually achieve what they're after? Maybe it's something like this. I have this pottery, and even though you're not a potter, but somebody in your extended family back home was, and you watched what they went through to make a frickin' pot, okay? You watched how their hands seized up because the clay leached all the moisture out of the hand. You distinctly remember that. How the old lady's hands look cracked and worn and so on from the work of making vessels of hospitality. Okay? It doesn't matter that you didn't make it yourself. The point is, you recognize in the item something we could call cultural patrimony. You recognize the deep runningness of the culture opposite you as manifest and embodied in this item for trade. Okay? So the person doesn't have to, quote, sell you, because your cultural sophistication makes this pot on the other side available to you for the deeply venerable thing that it is. Follow what I'm saying? Okay. So you know what I'm going to say next. When something happens, the items across from you cease to speak, cease to have their stories come along with them, cease to be available. There's something about your cultural atrophy that you project onto the item that you don't recognize. You don't recognize its valence, its proprieties, its value, its deep running worth, and so on. Something happened, okay? And because you're not making your own stuff back home or any part of it. And so now when you're in a circumstance like this and you're just trying to get this pot, but you know nothing about it, then the enterprise becomes, okay, so what do you have to part with to obtain the pot? And the next thing is you pretend you're not interested in obtaining the pot to obtain the pot. That becomes part of the deal. And then the person on the making end feels the deep running slight of your disinterest or your vague involvement in the proceedings, or maybe the worst, when it's not things you're going back and forth with. But there's a third thing called money, which nobody makes, which you're not reminded of your grandma or anyone else's with the money. And then money becomes the ghost of the original understanding of the cultural patrimony that sat between you. That's what happened, I'm fairly sure. The advent, the estrangement that comes with the stranger, instead of the opportunity to be your cultural best when the stranger comes. And then, of course, it bleeds through all kinds of transactions beyond the, quote, obvious material ones. So it's a rupture in translatability, isn't it?
You understand this to happen or have happened historically, culturally, etc., with matrimony as well?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, this is why, for example, things like the fetishization of virginity, I think it's traceable directly to what we're talking about. How so? Oh, this is a whole long thing, but the very short version would be this. Do you really believe that through all of human history, until the recent liberation, that people have forever fetishized the virginity of a young woman and jealously defended it, the, quote, men in particular, and that it became a commodity to trade back and forth in, and that it had to be prodded and poked at to determine its intactness, and this was deemed to be, honorable behavior? Do you really think that's the people you come from? That they would do that to the most cherished of their own? Barely pubescent girls? Come on now. I'm not saying it didn't happen and doesn't still happen. I'm not saying that. I'm saying, God Almighty, something happened for that to be so. And I'm trying to allude to you now what I think took place. Then all of a sudden, the hymen takes place of the pottery, doesn't it? And it becomes universally translatable, doesn't it? It becomes a kind of a ghosted artifact of a culturally intact time. It's as close as you can get. Hence this allegation of its purity, or the association with purity, and so on. I mean, there's lots to say about it. That gives you a feel for what might have happened there.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you for being so generous with your considerations here.
You see why I had to write a book, eh? There was too much bouncing around. Like, I had to just keep track of my own thoughts on the matter. But can you imagine all of this at play in the year, 2022, trying to put into motion a redemptive passion play called Matrimony, with all of this at play, not with all of this in my mind, with all of this actually disfiguring the anticipation of the proceedings for the people who came. Can you imagine? Can you imagine trying to pull it off? And contending overtly with all these things and trying to make room for them in a moment that's supposed to be allegedly, get ready for it, happy. I should have raised my rates on the first day, trying to pull that off. But anyway, okay, where you
Maybe now
go?
you'll have the opportunity.
No, man. No, I'm out of the running for that. Pompous has come and gone.
So in Matrimony, Stephen, you write that the brevity of modern ceremonies is really there to make sure that nothing happens. Nothing of substance, nothing of consequence, no alchemy, no mystery, no crazy otherworld stuff. That overreach there in its scripted heart tells me that deep in the rayon-wrapped bosom of that special day, the modern wedding is scared silly of something happening. That's because it has an ages-old, abandoned memory of a time when a wedding was a place where the gods came around, where human testing and trying and making was at hand, when the dead lingered in the wings, awaiting their turn to testify and inveigh. Gorgeous, gorgeous. And so I'm curious.
Rayon-wrapped bosom. That's not shabby.
Rayon-wrapped bosom of that special day.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, do you think the more than human world practices matrimony? And if so, what, if anything, might you have learned about matrimony from the more than human world?
I would say the reverse. I would say we practice the more than human world in matrimony. Not that the more than human world practices matrimony. We practice them matrimonially. Pshaw. Next. Okay, or no, I just gonna say that's pretty good. Well, where do we get our best stuff from? Let's just wonder that. Do we get our best stuff from being our best? Well, where does that come from? And there's a bit barbershop mirrors situation here, isn't it? To back. If you're thinking of time, you can kind of get lost in the generation of before, and it starts to sound like one of them biblical genealogies. But if you think of it as sort of the flashpoint of multiple presences, you think of it that way, then you come to credit the real possibility that your best stuff comes from you being remembered by those who came before you. Now, just let that sit for a second, because what I just said is logically incompatible. Okay? You're being remembered by people who came before you. That's not supposed to work, doesn't work that way. Right? Anticipated, maybe, but remembered? How? Well, if you credit the possibility of multiple beginnings, that's how. Okay? I'm saying that your best stuff, your best thoughts, not the most noble necessarily, I would mean the most timely, the ones that seem most needed suddenly. You could take credit, and sure, why not? Because ostensibly it arrives here through you. But if you're frank with yourself, you know you didn't do that on command, right? I mean, you could say, I just thought of it. But you know in your heart that it was thought of and came to you. I don't think there's any difference between saying that and saying you were thought of. So that's what I think the rudiments of old order matrimony are. They are old people and their benefactors in the food chain, and spiritually speaking, old people and their benefactors. The best part of them willed to us, entrusted and willed to us. So when you're willing to enter into the notion that old order matrimony is older than you, older than your feelings for the other person, older than your love and your commitment and your willingness to make the vows and all that stuff, then you're crediting the possibility that your love is not the beginning of anything. You see? Your love is the advent of something. And I use that word deliberately in its Christian notion. Right? It's the oncomingness, the eruption into the present day of something which turns out to be hugely needed and deeply unsuspected at the same time. I used to say in the school, can you have a memory of something you have no lived experience of? I think that's what the best part of you is. I'm not saying the rest of you is shite. I'm not saying that. You could say that. But I am saying that when I say the best part of you, that needs a lot of translating, doesn't it? But the gist of it is that the best part of you is entrusted to you. It's not your creation. It's your burden, your obligation, your best chance to get it right. And that's who we are to those who came before us. We are their chance to get it right. And matrimony is one of the places where you practice the gentle art of getting it right. Another decent reason to write a book.
So gorgeous. Wow. Thank you, Stephen. I might have one more question.
Okay. I might have one more answer. Let's see.
All right. Would I be able to ask if dear Nathalie Roy could join us up here alongside a good man? So returning to Matrimony, Ritual, Culture, and the Heart's Work. On page 94, Stephen, you write that hospitality of the radical kind is culture in its finest moments. Matrimony is radical hospitality's godmother. And hospitality is matrimony's alchemy at work. I'm going to read that again.
Yes.
When I'm reading it on the page, I have to read it 20 times to
I'd appreciate
wash over me properly.
Do you want me to read it?
If you like.
Sure. Just because I know what it sounds like. I got the book here. What's the page number?
Page 94.
Really? Let's back up a little bit. Okay. But rather than cast one more stone against the mediations of formal ritual, we could do something else instead. We could consider its strange, starched, precise ways. We could give ritual a seat at the laid-back, whatever dude table of our mutual lives. Those of them left. This will be hard for people who are living in those trim and sleek condos outfitted with a sink, a microwave, an island counter for snacking, and a pile of takeout delivery boxes in the closet waiting for garbage day. Dude, those things are the apotheosis of the non-aligned, self-designating life. They have a hole where the hearth used to be. Still, I think we should try. Matrimony, I'll try to show you, is radical hospitality's godmother. And hospitality is matrimony's alchemy at work.
Thank you, thank you.
Yeah.
There's another little one from page 93.
Oh, okay then. How does that go?
Quote, the ceremonies of hospitality were passports to something like peace, to honest regard for what people did not understand or had never seen or heard, as it loomed at the gate in dusty array, in human form. Hospitality was how God's loving people loved their gods and honored their ancestors' ways. They fed the gods of strangers by feeding strangers.
There you go. It's all in that one sentence.
And so I feel like this is an exquisite description, subtle as it may be, of the hospitality that has been offered here on your farm over the years. There were many times in this very hall where toward the end of our hours-long sessions together at the Orphan Wisdom School, you, Stephen, would implore us to consider that the work of those sessions, which you leaned into with such loving ferocity and faithfulness, didn't end once we went for lunch or dinner. That instead, the big learning was to be found in the banquet hall, the feasting space most often stewarded by your wife Nathalie and her scullery royalty. And so I'm wondering if you two would be willing to speak to the alchemy of how patrimony, matrimony, and hospitality have met and been practiced here on your farm over the years.
That's why you're sitting here, to answer that one. Where you go?
Well, it's beautiful to hear the whippoorwill.
You can do it. You can do it. It says you can do it. You can do it.
Well, I think I would begin with how things were when we were married here on this farm down by the river. What comes to mind is that everybody was participating in making the meals for the guests that were yet to arrive, and over the course of several days. And that we had an opportunity to lean in on some of the people that came to support or witness our dearest friends and companions, and they came to cook and participate in the preparation of the meals. And I can remember at a certain given moment in the evening when we all sat together, Steve had called over a certain group of the people that had assembled on one side of our gathering place, and I had gathered the other group of people that were not yet gathered in by that first group. And we spoke about hospitality, or we spoke about how we would honor their coming. But we spoke about it loudly so that the other side could hear. So that they could catch a whiff of what their presence meant to us without directly telling them face to face what they meant to us. They got to overhear this particular kind of murmuring. And that was, I think, the first iteration of not doing the same thing. Steve had different conversations with the people he was sitting with in his cluster, and I was having different kind of conversations with the people who were sitting in my cluster. And together, we weren't all talking about the same thing. This was layered somehow and complementary, and our conversations became more twilled than anything else. So that our voices began to stir and to waft and to be combined. By the next day, there were then already connections made between people who had been in the clusters together, but also I happened to have overheard a couple of words that came from your waft, from your cluster of people. And I think that has often been the way. Steve has been here in the hall and I have been down cooking, and I do what I can to receive how it is that people come across the field, having perhaps heard or been in something that I have not even been privy to, because I have been in the kitchen behind certain pots stirring the dishes, or in the garden harvesting, and I get to actually see what Steve has been up to only through how people are as they enter the banquet hall.
The devastation writ large on their faces.
Steve gets to see how it has been with people in my fold as they come back from having sat in the banquet hall. And so we're not really doing the same thing, and we're not actually in the same room with the same function. But I get to see his work through the visitation of the people that come through. Do you see what I'm saying? That there's this communication that seems to be between Steve and I that is not direct. It's not Steve telling me something and me telling him something.
It's mediated.
It's much larger than that. And it's not a courier that is running between the two of us saying, Steve just said and Nathalie just said. It's not like that at all. I get to tend to a certain element of the poverties of our times, to quote that phrase that Steve has so often used. And he gets to nourish people in a way that I haven't tended to them. Or perhaps even one leads to the other, and one opens the way to another. So maybe some kind of sphincter or something gland opens up by listening. There's many different kinds of sphincters. There's not only one.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I think there are. I think there are 3 sphincters in the human body.
Is it a matter of opinion?
I'm not sure, 100%. Okay. But there's something that opens up, something that's loosened.
Okay.
Or makes way for people to be able to receive the kind of hospitality that I have to offer, together with the people that assemble with me, and vice versa. Having been well nourished this way, they might be able to enter these doors and sit here with that kind of nourishment in their bodies. That's what I can come up to on the fly.
Thank you
Never
so much.
having been interviewed in my life before.
And so grateful to have been on the receiving end of that hospitality so many times, leading from one house to another here on the farm.
And an honor. You give me purpose. And you?
Oh, I don't know. I'm still on sphincters. But I'll see if I can get over that. Because it's such a visual.
Maybe it's my
let's
ESL.
be frank.
It's the ESL moment.
Yeah, I think so. So, I was the one who coined the term scullery royalty.
You were, yeah.
And people thought I was being a bit disingenuous, I think, in the early days when I said, what's happening in the kitchen is what I'm trying to keep pace with. Yeah. But it wasn't disingenuous at all. I mean, I don't underfunction very frequently. And I had no need to underfunction around that question either. I'm not saying secretly what's happening in the kitchen is the whole thing. I wasn't saying that. I was saying, if you want monophony, you just choose me. Or you just choose now. And a lot of people have done this. They write letters to Nathalie saying, you're the real teacher. And that sort of thing over the years, you know. Or I want you to be my teacher, or that kind of gear. But if you want polyphony, you allow that from one place in this field to another place in that one is civilization's flower. I'm choosing that word very deliberately. It's saying that things come to be as a result of the time and the distance and the labor to get from one to the other. It's not really the places. It's the willingness to move. Just when you've grown accustomed to the devastation or the nurturance of one place, you know, the obligation is to pick up and fold your tent and move, you know.
Yeah.
And so there's that. And, you know, we're coming close to the end here. So I'll just read a couple little things to you. Whoops. One is not my words, and one is. In John Berger's novel, Once in Europa, there is a peasant woman sitting in her stone kitchen on her farm in the French Pyrenees, late in the 20th century. Given the obligations to innovation for its own sake that progress binds us to, she is probably among the last generations of her kind. And she's giving life advice to her young daughter, advice that she knows isn't likely to survive the girl's formal education in town. It's matrimonial wisdom, tradition bound and life affirmed, trained upon patrimony. Let me say that again. It is matrimonial wisdom, tradition bound and life affirmed, trained upon patrimony. She says, I will tell you which men deserve our respect. Men who give themselves to hard labor so that those close to them can eat. Men who are generous with everything they own. And men who spend their lives looking for God. The rest are pig shit. Generosity, labor, a life spent enthralled to the divinity of the world. It's a severe standard, a severe test. It is also affirming, exceedingly candid, and deeply alert to the truth and travails and mandate of patrimony. There are men aching in their souls to do this work and have it recognized for what it is. The providing, the pilgrimage, those are the blessings that patrimony has to bestow. Recognition and a willingness to live in the house patrimony builds is a blessing for matrimony. Finally, you know, the word matrimony has as its axis not bride, not woman, not girl, mother. That's the root word of matrimony, mother. So apropos of that, and apropos of your question, mothering, I should say, does not seem to have been exclusively, and perhaps not even essentially, the domain of people who gave birth to small humans. It includes that, of course, when it happens, if it happens. And that might seem to be its most common function. But the capacity to mother is fundamentally the capacity to put oneself in the way of calling the stuff of human life together. That strange mix of willingness and fate feeling that inclines a person to say yes to something larger than themselves, into which the personal and particular parts of them are likely to evanesce. Mothering, you could say, takes the biography of the mother for nourishment, for sustenance. Not creator exactly, not autonomous conjurer. A mother is as much on the receiving end of the power of life called to rise as on the doing end. And even more so, mothering is the repertoire of a particular way of being human, the exercise of which is the occasion for life to live, not the reason, not the cause, the occasion. And this is why I extend the understanding of mothering into the architecture of matrimony and call that proper visitation of the former upon the latter home-making. Home is the amniotic sea of human, it seems to me. Mm-hmm. And living out the clutch of articulations of home in a human allotment of days is a life. And the presence of enough humans doing the homework of being together is culture. And so culture making is patrimonial work, and it is matrimonial work, not separated, bound. And that's what we did.
Mm. Yes, you did. I'm so lucky. What a thing. Thank you both for being willing to sit here and answer these questions, and for being willing to spill so much of your cups over the years in this place for so many strangers.
I'm glad we ain't done yet.
Mm-hmm. And so to close, I'd like to quote one final sentence from Matrimony. On page 215, you write, Stephen, very succinctly, "I am quite frequently asked to succumb to interviews." And so while this is undoubtedly true, I would argue that the interviews more often than not succumb to you. And your labors, and your give-a-shit, and willingness to speak on behalf of a more hospitable, patrimonial, and matrimonial world. And so your newest book, Matrimony, Ritual, Culture, and the Heart's Work, along with your other books, films, and music, are available for purchase now at orphanwisdom.com. Likewise, news on upcoming events and projects, including the scriptorium, Echoes of an Orphan Wisdom, can also be found at orphanwisdom.com. On behalf of the dear friends and family here and those listening, may your labors continue to fan out in the world and be of deep consequence to those who come upon them. Thank you for your time, consideration, and care this evening.
Well, this room has heard some fine things over the years. Yeah. Tonight was another one.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Pod. If what you heard had its way with you, if it left you with more questions than answers, you can subscribe to future episodes via your streaming service or directly at chrischristou.substack.com. That's CHRISCHRISTOU.substack.com. You can also follow us on social media via the handle The End of Tourism. Until next time, farewell, friends.